and we shall get started. So thank you very much, Rebecca, for joining us. We've got a great group. I'll ask the first few questions and then we'll open it up. So if everybody wants to be on mute for the next short period of this call, that's great. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Can you tell us where you are and also, introduce yourself? And then my first question is simply the most easy, which is how you got into watchmaking.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for joining on a cold Monday afternoon, or at least it's cold where I am. We're based in Staffordshire now. I'm originally from Birmingham, and now we live. I don't know if anyone knows Staffordshire very well. We live in a place called Cheadle, and we work in Leek, which is just on the border of the Moorlands and the Peak District. So, lovely part of the world. So we moved here a couple of years ago, and we had a workshop in Birmingham before that and London before that. And how I got into watchmaking. Well, I suppose I got into it either very late or very early, depending on how you define it, because I discovered watchmaking by accident when I was studying jewelry and silversmithing at university. So I started watchmaking when I was 17, 18 years old. But before that point, I had no idea it was a career. So it wasn't kind of like a watchmaker with this lifelong dream of this is what I want to be from childhood. My first watch memories are of Casio's, which are still one of my favorite brands. So even though kind of I work on I started out training in restoration, and I particularly like working on early watches, so sort of 17th, 18th century is my favorite to work on. And now we do fine watchmaking, but I still have a mad thing for Casio.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so when you got started and did your course and such like, what drew you to the older watches rather than thinking about what a traditional route might be to go and work for a modern brand or go into servicing or whatever?
Yeah, so well, I like working with my hands, always have done. Even as a kid, I was always the kid covered in dirt and mud and paint and all the rest of it. And always taking things apart that I usually couldn't get back together again, much to the annoyance of my parents. Um, I like making and I like hands-on. And if you're doing modern servicing, it's a lot of part exchanges
Mhm.
and
Yeah.
uh, modular exchanges, stuff like that. There's not much working on lathes and mills and filing and all the grease and swarf and everything that goes
Mhm.
with that. So yeah, for me, it was always just it immediately drew me. And I did work doing servicing, sequential servicing, and I lasted about 6 months,
Mhm.
which it just wasn't for me. Too repetitive. And yeah, restoration, you've got something different on your bench every day. And even if you're working on the same movement, because it's been worn
Mhm.
differently over the last 50, 70, 100 years, it will be different just by the way kind of the relationship it's had with its owner. Yeah, and I love that.
So how did you find your way into that then?
Yeah, completely by accident and on a really weird journey as well. So I went to a grammar school in Birmingham, which was very science focused.
Mhm.
I've always loved science and art, and but you taught them as very different things, and like you can be successful in STEM subjects or a failure in the arts, basically. And that was what school was about. So I ended up doing all sciences for A levels and just hated it. It just happened that I was an air cadet because I wanted to join the army of all
Mhm.
things. That was my plan. And one of my cadet leaders was a jeweler. I was like, oh, if you did you
Right.
know there's a school of jewelry in Birmingham? You should go and check it out. You might like it. So I booked in on an open day, and I just thought, yes, like the building's beautiful. If anyone's been there, it's an amazing space. And dropped out of school and started studying jewelry and silversmithing. And it was while I was there that I started working with basic articulation and automata. And my work was spotted by some of the watchmaking students, including Craig, my now husband. And they asked if I thought about being a watchmaker. And like I said before, I didn't know that was a career at all. I didn't know
Mhm.
it was a thing. So I thought, no, but that sounds cool. And I had a look around the workshop. I was like, yes, where's this subject been all my life? Because it is, you're an artist and you're a designer and you're a physicist and you're an engineer, and it all gets rolled into one. And yeah, it's so challenging. And I love that. Like every day you're doing something new, and just everything came together, and that was it.
So it's it's a great story because, in a way, you're very lucky to have found something you were so excited about while you were still quite young.
Yeah,
A lot of
yeah.
people follow those traditional routes.
No, definitely, especially in the UK with watchmaking. I think in Switzerland it's a normal career.
Mm.
It's mentioned at school, they have colleges in it and people go to university doing it. It's a normal thing. Whereas in the UK, I think when I started, it was before the bachelor's degree was around. It was the British Horological Institute course, which was vocational.
Hmm.
So you couldn't get a student loan for it. And the result was, I remember one of our tutors saying that horology becomes more interesting the less time you have left. And I think I was one of the youngest students by quite a long way. Most people were past retirement and doing this as a retirement hobby. So yeah, it's changed a lot, and it definitely was very unusual at the time. I think that's changing now, especially with it being a degree. The students, for most of them, are school graduates.
Hmm.
It's nice to see because then they've got a whole career ahead of them in the industry. But yeah,
So talk us through I mean, I guess the thing that we have least experience with in terms of the club, in fact, almost none, is looking at really old timepieces. So as you said, you're working on timepieces that are hundreds of years old, not just 50 years old or 20th century wristwatches. You're working with everything really that comes under. I guess you don't do clocks, so everything under miniature horology.
no, we
Um,
don't, no C word in our workshop. No.
so talk us through the challenges and experience of working on timepieces like that.
Yeah, I suppose I love history as well. I've always been a history buff, and all restorers, whatever you're restoring a historian to do, you have to research and understand how things were made in order to put them back to the way they were made. So it just brings in another subject that I'm really passionate about. And I love the relationships that we have with watches. And quite often that's just as important to me as the watch itself.
Hmm.
And in our restoration work, I mean, we worked on everything from watches that cost sort of, you could sell for 10, £20, up to watches that sold for a lot of money. And the value, the financial value, never has never been important to me. It's about
Hmm.
the relationship that the owner had with it. And some of the most special pieces that we worked on were sort of things that had been given as gifts from late fathers, or when people turn 21 and now they're in their 70s or something, and it's like they've been looking to get this watch restored and no one's been able to do it for them, and kind of we're their last chance. It's come out of the drawer
Yeah.
rusty. And yeah, one we had like that was the guy was in his 70s, and he'd been given it as a 21st birthday present, gone on holiday, gone straight in the sea with this lovely old, it's just a Lanco, like 9 carat gold watch, and rusted completely. Seawater, obviously, this isn't a waterproof watch, it's just a dress watch. And it had been in a drawer ever since.
Hmm.
And he'd never managed to find anyone who was able to do it. And we got it back up and running for him. And that was really special. We've had some, yeah, watches with just amazing stories. And yeah, I love that. And you feel like you're working with something that's been around. I mean, some of them have been around for hundreds of years. And the oldest story I have with a watch, it was a really beautiful 18 karat gold pear case pocket watch from around 1770. And it was in 6 generations of the same family. And we were servicing it for the mother to give to her son on his wedding day, for
Mm.
him to pass it on to his family. And that was such a special thing because you're aware that you're with this watch for this tiny little moment in time of its life, and it's lived for hundreds of years before you. And if it's well looked after, it's going to live for hundreds of years after you.
Yeah.
And you're aware of that when you're making them as well. When you make watches, this is going to be alive for a lot longer than I will. It's like kind of like a mechanical ghost
Hmm.
to haunt the world when I'm gone.
I've not heard them described as a mechanical ghost before, but perhaps yours will be. Um, so talk about some of the techniques and things you use, because I know that like to use old equipment, but I assume that you're doing the best thing for each job. It's not that you only create things using old-fashioned techniques or anything like that. So can you just talk about how you do things, please?
Yeah, so but starting out in heritage manufacturing, well, and heritage restoration, because there's no parts supply, there's no economies of scale
Hmm.
with it. So there's no point investing in CNC because you're only going to be making one-off parts. And that means you end up getting very good on lathes, traditional watchmakers lathes, 8mm lathes, mills. Um, yeah, it's a lot of lathes, basically. And yeah, and you just get good with hand skills. So when we first started making our own watches, it made sense for us to continue using the skills that we picked up as restorers. So we started making watches in the same way that we were making parts of vintage and antique
Mhm.
watches, which is a way it was done hundreds of years ago too. So there's certainly no harm in working that way. It limits us in that we can only make tiny, tiny numbers of pieces. Um, Last year was our busiest year with, I think we had 8 watches leave the workshop in a year, which is huge for us.
Mhm.
Normally about 5 watches a year is a comfortable amount for us to complete. So that's the only way in which it restricts us really. But it's, yeah, really traditional. Our first completely in-house movement we nicknamed Project 248,
Mhm.
which was supposed to be a nickname, but it's stuck now. So we're still calling it 248. And that represented 2 watchmakers, our forehands, and an 8mm lathe, which is like your kind of go-to standard for watchmakers lathes. And we did start off with one 8mm lathe, but I think we now have about 6, and also 2 6mm lathes and a 10mm lathe.
Right.
Like I said, a lot of lathes for 2 watchmakers. We have a lot of lathes.
Yeah. So that sounds like a very good name for a caliber compared to many others we see out there. So I think that's perfect. So talk us through that then. So when you're a very experienced restorer and you can do a lot of you have the capability to do a lot of different things. How did you start designing your own watch and thinking about your own watch movement and what was important to you within that timepiece?
I mean, it came really naturally in the end because you do get to a point as a restorer that you've made pretty much every part for other people's watches. So
Hmm.
you kind of get to a point you sat there thinking, well, I do it for everyone else's watches. And technically, there's no reason I can't do it for my own watch.
Hmm.
So that's kind of how that grew. And our first watch we designed was based on, we thought we'd look back to where the English industry left off in the sort of 1880s, 1890s and pick up there and
Okay.
take it to the 21st century using materials that we could hand machine. But also, I mean, we use a type of bronze that's developed for Formula One as well. So
Hmm.
introducing kind of contemporary stuff, but it all had to be able to work on our own machines. Um, and cherry picking our favorite bits of history. Again, as restorers, you get to see so much. So it's got fully functional Breguet parachute shock setting, which we got an original from not a Breguet, unfortunately, but someone he was affiliated with, made in around 1810, and used that to
Hmm.
reverse engineer. And the balance wheel itself was inspired by George Daniel's watchmaking, which is, we have a heavily coffee stained coffee
Hmm.
that lives at the end of our bench. We use German silver because we love South German watchmaking from the turn of the 20th
Right.
century. And Rocking Bar keyless work is a tribute to Derek Pratt as well. So we're another great fan of his work. So yeah, it was kind of historically led, but also using more contemporary materials and some more contemporary production techniques as well. And yeah, the first one took 6 years.
Right.
But we're speeding things up now. Now we've got the R&D down for the first one. But yeah, that was good fun. You kind
And
of
do you
you
work
can
with the clients on the dials and hands and things like that, or is it strictly one style that you prefer?
No, we do. We work within kind of reasonable limitations. So we wouldn't
Hmm.
do anything completely wild and wacky and that doesn't suit our style at all. But we also do a lot with our clients. So we will develop, yeah, dial designs with them. We're doing a couple at the moment. Our last tailor-made watches, where we work between a graphic designer now and the client, and the three of us get together and kind of figure out exactly what we want out of the watch.
Hmm.
Look at things like fonts and printing. We like playing with printing and enamel as well. We're doing our first painted enamel dial at the moment,
Oh, wow.
working with enamel artists, which is really good fun, and engine turning. And you get to play, yeah, bring in these different craftspeople. So our company is just me and Craig,
Hmm.
but when we start a watch build, it's like we almost expand into a little team of people, just at independent workshops around not just the country but around the world sometimes as well. And we have a specific team working on each watch. So we're the watchmakers, but we'll have our engraver, enameler, potentially gilder, sometimes a goldsmith involved as well. So we get a little bit bigger, and then we shrink down to just me and Craig again.
Yeah, which is
Job.
a, a good segue, I think, into the history of the industry, because that's the very much the historic way watches have been made. And you have written and published a fantastic book. Mine is over there on my bookshelf, so I can't hold it up. Ed's holding it up. There you go. So if anyone can see Ed on their screen, Ed's holding it up. Um, so thank you for writing it. It's fantastic, and I know that many people agree with me. And I just wanted to hear about the story of the book, really, and how you decided to to do such a big effort. It's not an easy thing to write a book while doing another full-time job. So talk us through that and what you got out of it as well for yourself, because I've got a lot out of it, and I think other people have. But what did you get out of it?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, that's it. I love history and I love writing, and I suppose I'm just a glutton for punishment, probably part of that. But it came out at the back of so I did a PhD, which I did full
Mhm.
time and running the business full
Right.
time.
Okay.
But it kind of helps, I think, because it's all watchmaking related. My head was never out the zone.
Hmm.
I think people who do kind of like a PhD in one subject whilst having a job in a completely different
Mm.
subject, they have my admiration, because I don't know how you kind of like shift your brain into different gears
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
completely different fields. So for me, it was just, yeah, it was like a natural part of what I was doing during the day and just carrying on in evenings, weekends, and holidays with a very patient husband. Um, so yeah, I finished that and I really wanted to publish the subject of my PhD, but I was really struggling to get interest. So it's incredible how we don't realize this when you're into watches and it's your thing. You don't realize how niche it is
Mm.
mainstream, and that's something that I have come across a lot of that you speak to people outside of our world and they're like, no one's interested in watches. That's
Mhm.
what's that about? Yeah, this will never sell, or no one will watch that. Which obviously we know is nonsense, but I do feel like it's been a real eye opener in how much we need to educate the outside world of how big this subject is and how fascinating and rich and diverse it is. But that's an ongoing project for me. But yeah, I struggled to publish my PhD, and weirdly, I was in an article on the Guardian, and a literary agent got in touch with me and asked if I'd ever thought about writing a book. And by this point, I'd had so many rejections. I was like, well, yeah, I'd love to, but no, it's never going to happen.
Mhm.
And yeah, she picked me up, basically worked with me on the proposal, and that's what became Hands of Time.
Wow.
So my PhD is one chapter in it, but it just, yeah, it blew the whole thing open, and it's done a good job of proving that there is a good
Mm.
deal of interest in this subject too. So hopefully this will slowly start opening doors for others.
And what's your favorite part of the material, the history in that book, or just the history of watchmaking in general?
Oh goodness, all of it. The history of how ancient it is fascinates me. That humans have been keeping track of time for
Mhm.
tens of thousands of years, and that we're just at the very this at the moment. Well, I was about to say we're at the very end of it, but really, we're still only at the beginning of it in the grand scheme of human existence. It just fascinates me. It's something that unites us across the millennia and around the world as well. When you look at early timekeepers cropping up in China and North
Mhm.
America and across Europe, all at similar times, apparently completely independently of each other in the very early days. It's just kind of it's an instinctive urge that is beyond our control. And I love that. And I think perhaps that's part of the reason why we build these special relationships with these objects that I'm sure we're all wearing at the
Mhm.
moment, is that they are so special to us. Time is so special to us. It's the most precious commodity we have, and that we've got these little machines that we've invented that can help us track and live our lives, and that they're so close to us that we wear them on our body and we take them around with us every day, that we build these kind of relationships with them, and then passing things on to your kids, that your child will remember that you wore that watch and carried it so close to you. It reminds them of time and something that is like a really close tangible link to past people. And yeah, I find the whole thing quite magical, I suppose, if you haven't gathered.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we started the Watch Collectors Club so that people could find each other who feel very similarly. So here we
Yeah.
are. And yeah, I think one of the wonderful things about the watch community is how passionate people are about their timepieces and the stories behind them and the history and the heritage, depending on what the timepiece is, or just something brand new that really excites them. And it's the really fun part of this hobby and this interest, as you say. So I think this is a good place to open it up for questions. I think given the size of the group, if you can put your hand up, then I can give you a shout and you can ask away. And if no one has one, then I'll continue. But I can see Ed straight away. So Ed, if you're on unmute, please, and then ask
Yes.
away.
Um, so maybe not such a simple question to answer, but when you're working on your custom commissions, which is your favorite part of the process to work on? Are the bits that you kind of wish you didn't have to do, or is it all the joy? But where do you particularly feel like you thrive?
Um, I suppose I love project management in a weird way. I love the early kind of bringing together the design and the team and the kind of getting your idea down of what you're going to be creating is a really fun bit. And then the next fun bit is when you see that starting to come together. So when you've made pieces, you've got physical components coming together, and you're starting to see this idea that you kind of woke up with turning into a physical thing. So those are like the two special bits, I suppose, for build. And then the bit I don't like about it, we are literally just me and Craig. We've got a VA now who's wonderful, but I still do a lot of admin. And to be honest, that's the worst, the worst bit of running a business. My goodness, the admin. If there's a way of getting out of that, making I love, but paperwork, yeah, takes
And
it.
are there times where you're sort of halfway through a build and you just go, crikey, this is crap, or this is never going to work, or it's just not what I wanted it to look like, or by the stage that you're putting stuff together, you're pretty sure that it's going to come out how you want it to.
Yeah, oh, completely. I think that's another good thing coming at as a restorer is you've got all this training that you've learned from centuries of watchmaking of what does and doesn't work. So you have a really good grounding of what is and isn't going to look right the moment you put pen to paper at the very beginning. I mean, we do have fails sometimes because something's gone wrong in the lathe or soldering or something's part melted or whatever, and we have to scrap that and start again. But in terms of the design itself, then yeah, we've got a good idea once we've set on something. Something will have been referenced along the way, so we'll know what it's turning into. Yeah.
Cool, thank you.
Ed, I can see you've got a question.
I do. It's related to the design process actually. So, as Ed was asking you about your favorite part of it, and you were describing the early stages. When designing something, I mean, how far do you go back? What kind of methods do you use to pre-visualize even just the design of things? Like you mentioned in enamel dial earlier on. I mean, do you guys go as far as using digital visualization tools, or are you well, yeah, I mean, that's my question, really. I mean, what kind of methods do you use to try to answer those questions as early as possible, or how do you do it?
Yeah, so we've got a collection of inspiration, movement styles, engraving that when we first started out, it was back in the days during the recession when gold prices were really high. So a lot was getting scrapped. And it was before people realized that movements could have any value. So a lot of it was getting thrown away. So we went around bullion dealers in the jewelry quarter in Birmingham where we were based and bought in thousands of movements. And of those, I mean, unfortunately, there were some incredibly beautiful watches being scrapped back then, but we've saved what we can. And now we have a box of like our inspiration box, we call it. So we can start with something like that, having a look at some pieces from, again, we've got stuff in there dating back to sort of 1700 up to the 1940s, 50s, 60s. Have a look to see if there's anything there that we like the look of, not just design, but the techniques that were being used as well. You get different ways of applying enamel, you get different ways of having inlaid enamel numerals and then metal dart, things like that. You can look for those little details and think, I'll take that and pick these bits and pieces. So that's really useful. And then Craig and I were also, for what the way we work, lucky in that we're one of the last generations to go through making training in the UK who use traditional hand rendering. So we were taught to draw. So a lot of it is just pen and paper, sit down and start sketching out ideas. And that's how we start with everything to this day. It's still pen and paper. So sometimes I can use Illustrator. I'm not very good at it. But kind of trying to get that's usually when we get to the point of I'm trying to communicate the design to someone outside of the business who doesn't get our strange scrappy drawings. That's the point things like Adobe come in, but I'll do a really rough job. And again, we work with a graphic designer. We've got a dial printer in Tenbury Wells who's fantastic. And I can send them my mess to turn it into something they can use. Yeah.
Great, thank you.
Oh, thank you.
Am I right in thinking you make the cases as well yourselves?
We do at the moment, yeah. So we started off doing that because, well, the first watch we made was a competition that we entered with a design, and then we had 10 weeks to make it, which was stellar. And we had this well, firstly, we didn't expect to win the competition. So when we did, we panicked. And then we had this idea of, oh, we'll just find someone to work with, because we'd never made a case before. So it's all right, there'll be someone who can make watch cases. And then we quickly realized there were very, very few people who could make watch cases, none of whom would be able to do it in 10 weeks. They all had huge backlogs of work, so few of them. So we had to teach ourselves case making. And I'd already done jewelry and silversmithing, so that helped. And then Craig managed to get a brief apprenticeship with one of the last case makers left in the UK, a guy called Adam Phillips, who sadly has passed away now, as it had the only other case maker who was around at that time as well. So now it's a really, really rare skill, case making. I only know of 3 watchmakers doing case making in the UK, and they only make cases for their own watches, or restoration pieces. So we're hoping to train up another company. So that would be, because that, again, we only ended up doing it because we couldn't find anyone else to do it with, and it takes us away from watchmaking. So we can do it, but we'd rather focus more on watchmaking. So hopefully within the next year or so, there'll be a company in the UK who'll be able to work with us and others. So that'll be our contribution.
So that's really interesting. So I don't know if that sort of comes under the bucket of talking about the future, or you simply mean that you take an apprentice and hopefully an apprentice learns it. I don't really know what that means, but I guess broader, what's the future hold? Is it staying what you do now and just continuing to learn, or are there more opportunities coming up as you grow?
Streamlining. We're streamlining what we do. So when we first started out, Craig and I both going into this together, it means you've got no steady income to support you. And we started the business with a £15,000 bank loan, which does not get you very far. I can tell you now. That's why we quickly moved from London back to Birmingham. So it was a real struggle. Like the first 8 to 10 years of running the business was a real struggle. And the result was we did too much. So we're doing restoration, servicing, tailor-made builds where we would take heritage calibers, completely strip them down, rebuild them, and make cases, dials, everything else with them. And then we started doing 248, which was our completely in-house watch movement, which for 2 people is just a crazy amount of work, and writing books, which madness. So we're streamlining that right back, and we're just focusing on making our in-house movements from 2026 onwards. So that's the biggest change in our business, and that will allow us to really put everything into the production of our in-house caliber. And with that, I'd love to work with some other companies and start getting more businesses able to support watchmakers in the UK with things like case making and dial manufacturing, and just to really help elevate them as well. Because I think for us, that's a greater contribution than us training one apprentice. Is if we can train 3 or 4 different companies to supply the British industry, then that's going to help more people in the long run, and us along the way, hopefully.
So the restoration business will take a bit of a pause.
Yes, the restoration has taken a pause for now, which is a shame because we don't have enough restorers
No.
left. It's really hard to get watches, especially the earlier stuff.
I think Vrata has a question, if you'd like to ask it.
Yeah, hi. It's regarding to the 248 movement. So are you able to work in batches? Let's say you were able to do, I don't know, batches of five, balance bridges or things like that when you have the setup right? Or do you actually go, piece by piece and do everything once and then reset and start working on the second watch?
So this is part of our streamlining as we're improving this. So we did a batch of 5 for the first 248 watches, naively thinking that there was such a thing as economies of scale when you're hand making everything, and there's not. So all of those really were going back to making each part have set up every time because everyone is coach built. They're all unique. And that's why it took us 6 years to make the first watch, because we just created 5 times the amount of work trying to do 5 in one go. Whereas with the next generation of watches, this is again trying to work with other companies to help us things like roughing out parts. So instead of sitting there with a piercing saw cutting things out, to work with other companies to help blank out parts, so we can just focus on the finishing of them. So we really want to work on our finishing as well, and building, and also working on some complications too. So watches at the moment are time only. So I'd love to start innovating and really working into the foundation that we've built. But to do that, we need to buy ourselves time, and to buy ourselves time, we need to work with other people. So that's kind of the direction we're going in. And at that point, we are hoping that'll be our 5 watches a year. That will work then as kind of having runs of things done in one go. I'm not sure it would be quite the interchangeable parts at a Wolfram level, but it'll be a lot better than, a lot more organized than we're currently doing.
Waldo, I can see you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Rebecca. It's been really fantastic hearing you talk. Did you just mean then that you are looking to create a company that might, a British company that might supply ébauche? So you have blanks that you would then just do finishing with, which is traditional in a sense.
Yeah, I don't think that we don't know of any companies in the UK who'd be at that level just yet. So we're taking the kind of the high-end Swiss independent approach, which is more you get your gear cutting firms, you get your small engineering firms, and you work between a few different firms who will just supply parts. So you just get a load of parts, and then you kind of finish and fit and put everything together. And that's kind of from the independent watchmaker end of things, from your higher end watchmakers of the 17th, 18th, 19th century. That was more the way, until you got into ébauches, the way that they would work. So that would be the watchmaker's job. There was the highest level of it all. They bring together all the parts and turn it into a finished watch. So that's what we're planning next. But I mean, it'd be lovely to see a company start up who could do that in the UK. We'll see. We'll see. There's certainly a demand for it.
I can see your hand, Brian. Please go ahead.
Hello. First of all, I just want to say your book is absolutely great. I loved reading it, and it was just really easy to read, which is actually not often the case with books about watches. So really well done with that. It's a fantastic book. What I wanted to ask you was, people are always saying how hard it is to make a movement and how impossible it is, and that many of what we call British watches don't have, no one can make a movement, but you seem to have done it. So what's so hard about it, and why have you succeeded?
Thank you for the book comment, Percy. And I dogged determination. Not giving up and being able to give up. I mean, it's really hard because we don't have the supportive networks that they have in Switzerland. We used to have that in the UK, but because the industry went, the network of businesses that supported the industry all went or diversified and changed what they're doing. And kind of like you get Smith's Industries and stuff now doing high-tech stuff, and they're not having anything to do with the watch industry anymore, stuff like that. so not having anyone to support you, either in terms of with their skills, supplying things to your business, or even just mentoring and support to kind of guide you through that process of setting up a business and what to expect. Because it takes a long time to establish yourself. And the first part of that is it is a really hard slog. So if you're on your own with no financial backup, it is tough going. And it made me feel better that Max Booster said in an interview recently, it took him 10 years to really found MBNF and get that to the point that it's now at. And I thought, okay, well, if it took him 10 years, that makes me feel better about it taking 10 years, because it really does. Yeah, because you've got to build your reputation as well. And in that time, you're making something that's very high value, but you don't have the reputation to sell it at a high value. So that means you're effectively working for free at times and potentially getting yourself into debt or whatever to pay to make people nice things while you build your reputation, so that one day you'll hopefully be able to charge the right amount. And knowing how to charge the right amount as a craftsperson, we are the worst people. We always undervalue our time. I think that goes across all crafts and arts disciplines too. So figuring it out, and some of the kind of best steps forwards for us has been things that kind of seem obvious now, but I wish I'd had someone around to tell me to do this earlier on in my career, is things like speaking to your clients, because we're not watch collectors at that end of the market. Our clients are, so they know what they expect. And a lot of them are very savvy business people as well. So asking them for advice, what do you think we're doing right? What do you think we're doing wrong? What do you think is reasonable? How much would you have paid for this? Now you've already paid for it, so you're safe. Like, what, how would you change our business to make it more successful? We've had some clients give us fantastic informal advice, and I wish we'd done that sooner. But it's an easy thing in retrospect, isn't it? But yeah, it can feel very alone when you're starting out, and hopefully that's something that's changing, particularly at the watchmaker at the bench side of things, because we usually are one-man and two-man bands, just putting in a lot of hours. Yeah.
And do you think what's your view on the growth of independent watchmakers around the world? Because it's not just Switzerland where there's lots of watchmakers who have amazing training and then set themselves up, but now people like you are popping up in different countries around the world. And how do you feel about it? Is it, do you speak to any of them? Are you getting to know them in any way, or are you just sort of doing your thing in your lane?
Yeah, I mean, I try to speak to everyone. We try to be friendly, and we've always been very much of the attitude of we don't do the whole it's got to be British, British, British. We are British, and everything will be British. Like the dial enamel painter we're working at the moment is in China, and she's a phenomenal artist. And we work with an engraver in Germany. Like, that's again the more traditional approach for us, is you work with the very best people in your craft wherever they are in the world. It doesn't have to be English for me, it has to be good. So that's kind of, yeah, in that sense we get out quite a bit. But then, I mean, watchmakers can be funny creatures. I'm sure you've come across some of them. So we try to be friendly, but not everyone is always friendly back. But that's okay. And it varies as well. It varies from country to country and watchmaker to watchmaker. Some are phenomenal and amazingly supportive, and others not so much so. But that's fine. And I think the industry as a whole is just doing so well at the moment, that can only be a good thing, because there's so much attention now on independent watchmaking. And that's something that has changed from when we started our business 10 years ago, is there's now actually an audience of people looking for independent watchmakers and the next big thing in independent watchmaking. 10 years ago, it wasn't a scene, really. I mean, you've got Roger. Frodger, this was back in the days when Frodger, people in the industry knew they were out there doing something, but no one quite knew what. Carvey Vitellone and people like that, and Philippe Dufour, and then the Daniels legacy, and that was it. But the scene that we have now is, yeah, I mean, it's a really great environment for people wanting to enter this now. I think there's a lot more support and a lot more attention. Yeah.
And there's certainly, from my perspective, there seems to be a lot of collectors who've really are really passionate about finding the watch and watchmaker who speak to them. Is that what you've found with your clients?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's the thing that the independents offer that the big brands don't, is that you can actually sit at a table with the person who'll be making your watch and share ideas with them and follow the journey of the creation of your timepiece as well, that you don't get kind of generic marketing photos at the end of it. You get photos of your actual watch as it's being created. And yeah, picking up the phone to your watchmaker. I think that means a lot to people. And yeah, it's a special way for us to work as well, as we know all of our clients, which if you made more watches, there's no way we'd know all of our clients. We know where all of them go. Yeah, it's kind of like a family, weirdly. That makes sense.
That's nice description. Waldo has another question.
Yeah, forgive me. But it makes me. I loved the book as well. I can echo exactly what Brian said, and I love history and things. Do you think you'll and just listening to you talk about the stories of the watches that you've worked on or that you are working on, do you think you'll write something, or would you write even little capture the stories of some of the watches that you've worked on specifically? Be lovely to read them.
Yeah, I am working on another couple of books at the moment. The next one is a kid's book about watchmaking. So that's actually out this year. So that's not so much on the storytelling side of things, but that I'm working with a secondary school physics teacher, Alam Shahar, who yeah, he's brilliant and a fantastic science communicator and educator. So we're using watch and clock making to explore curriculum, science, and history, and that's with Dorling Kindersley. So I'm hoping that will introduce a whole new generation to the subject that I had no idea existed until I found it by accident at uni. And then my next grown-up book, yeah, that's in its early stages at the moment, and I'm still drawn whether or not to write something non-fiction or fiction. I'm erring towards fiction at the moment, which will be yeah, kind of a big venture for me, but it will allow me to kind of do a lot more of this storytelling, because there is so much to be said that it would be good fun.
Ed has another question.
Which Ed? Ed Thomas. Ed Thomas, you go first.
Oh, thank you very much, Ed. I'm going to ask you to look into a crystal ball, Rebecca, if I may. You were talking about the independent watchmakers generally, but if you were to gaze into your crystal ball and maybe look a little bit into the future, do you have any sort of thoughts on trends that might kind of present themselves over the next couple of years, whether that's a local trend in the UK or maybe even a little bit wider globally? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that kind of thing.
Yeah, I suppose the biggest change we've got coming up at the moment is things like AI, and if or how that's going to impact the watch industry. I wonder whether or not there's going to end up being a bit of a divide between watchmaking that uses state-of-the-art technology and your more traditional watchmaking, and that kind of only the human hand can create things that aren't quite perfect. The imperfection is human, perfection is computer and machinery. So that kind of celebration of imperfection and that kind of treasure.
My computer only turns on like 3 out of every 5 times for me most days, so I think they're probably pretty much imperfect.
Yeah, or not. But technically, that's the thing, isn't it? Like AI is supposed to be the ultimate in logic, and humans aren't. So will we end up seeing that as being the divide between kind of the human hand and not? The illogical and the imperfect versus the perfect and pure logic? I don't know. We'll have to see, won't we? It's daunting.
I wondered about how you managed to, because I guess a positive of making beautiful handmade watches is that you get to know your customers. The flip side is you don't get to have many customers. So how do you manage what I assume is a lot of disappointed potential customers constantly knocking on the door for a space on your production list, or is that less of a case than we may think?
Wow, I suppose twofold. First is our wonderful VA assistant Kirsty who fields people for me, so I don't have to deal with that myself anymore, because it was quite heartbreaking at times, especially when people have been following you for quite a long time and not realised you have quite a long build waiting list and things. So that is hard. But also, I mean, we don't advertise at all, so we're not going out there trying to fish for new stuff, and that's another reason why we never do shows, because I just feel like it would be insincere is the wrong word, but it wouldn't be right to go out and doing shows and showcase our work to people and then say, oh, but I'm sorry, you can't have it. Just doesn't feel fair, really. So that's another thing I'd like to do in the future, is find ways that I can engage with stuff like that doesn't involve trying to sell watches, so I can meet people and share what we do without disappointing people. Yeah, it is tricky. It is tricky.
No, thank you.
John?
I was going to say the physics teacher, there might be something in there. Potentially use the watches in that context. Maybe get together there, do a bit of an educational piece. The physics teacher wants to do some sort of exploration of time, and you've got things that the kids can't afford anyway.
Yeah.
Hands-on example.
Yeah, I mean for the kids, but with part of it's going to be interactive as well. So like make at home experiments for science time related things. But yeah, I mean there's going to be ways around it, and I'd like to do more educational stuff. I'd like to do more mentoring at some point too, because I found that so beneficial. Yeah, we'll figure it out.
And I thought it really interesting that you wanted to move into some more complications. And is that going to be the same idea, that some of the best ideas you've seen in previous watches, it'll still be something quite new and quite unique to you?
Yeah, I mean, by complications, we're talking very kind of our level of complications. So we never do like a tourbillon or something like that. What we're thinking, things like calendar, moon phase, hourly chimes. I love watches that make sounds. So if that's the sort of thing we'd like to explore. So nothing like grand complication level, just something subtle and beautiful. That's the sort of watchmaking that excites us, because you can do incredible things now. Especially the bigger the budget and the more technology you have, the more incredible the watch can be. But for us, the beauty is in the simplicity and the craft. So that's stuff that's led by that. And in terms of pushing boundaries, I love pushing boundaries with craftspeople and just seeing how much you can achieve by hand, which will limit you on one side of things, but it's also pushing human ability in another way. And I love that too. Like even the moon phase that we did for the Watches of Switzerland watch, we worked with a gun engraver who'd done a few bits and pieces for, but he'd never used the wheel we made out of steel, and he inlaid 24 karat gold into the wheel, which is a common technique used in guns, but very rarely used on things that small. So really kind of pushing people to experiment with their skills and work on smaller stuff, more complicated and detailed stuff. And I mean, that was just so beautiful, the job he did with that in the end. That was a real joy to see. That was another moment of things coming together and thinking, this is a real watch now. So that kind of the complication of the craft and the kind of pushing skills boundaries. Yeah,
I mean, it sounds delightful, to be honest. A really nice way to work. We were at Frodsham last year to learn about what they do, and we will return, but their next project is kind of the opposite. They're going for technical challenges, which is what they get very excited about. It's different, it's different. It's a horses for courses kind of thing. What really drives you is different to what drives them, obviously.
Dave, did you have a question? I saw your hand shoot up and down.
I did actually. Thanks, Ed. Thank you. Hi, Rebecca. With any watch brand or watchmaker, I'm always trying to work out who's buying things, and it doesn't matter whether it's super high end like yourselves. It could be anything from Breitling to Patek to MB&F. So, who would your typical client be?
Oh,
and are they from? And also, sorry, are they from the UK?
That's right. Okay. So they really vary, for one. we have some people who are seasoned watch collectors. We have other people who this might be one of only a couple of watches they own, but they love art, sculpture, architecture, and they commission artists, and that's their thing. So they generally one of those camps, or sometimes a bit of both. And initially they were very much UK based. A lot of it came out of the clients who build up in restoration. So they'd seen our work on other pieces for them, and then asked us about the pieces we were making ourselves. And then when my book came out, that all changed very quickly. And in the space of about 12 months, we went from most of our clients being in the UK to being very much global. So we have a lot in the US and the Far East now. So Singapore, Hong Kong, China, Malaysia. Yeah, suddenly really, really very. But now less so from the UK, but still a few, but less so.
But the book was like a catalyst for kind of going global, almost putting out international and a lot more interest. That's great.
Yeah, I didn't quite anticipate that happening, and especially that extreme, but yeah, very much so.
Is it a good thing? You sound quite stressed.
Oh, do I? I was letting it show. No, I think it's one of those things, like I was saying to Hamish earlier, it's good to be busy. You know, you totally to be busy, and it is really good to be busy with what's going on in the world at the moment. And it's a wonderful place to be such a tiny little traditional business, and to have a waiting list now that's kind of pushing 10 years long is great. So yeah, it's exciting, it's challenging. Yeah, of course it is, but we love what we do. And it is a real pleasure. And now I think we're at the point where we've got watches coming together and going out, and everything is coming together. It's yes, we're tired, but also it's thrilling, and yeah, I wouldn't change it for the world.
Do you have a sense of scale? I mean, you know, when listening to you talk about it there, you're still obviously incredibly and ultimately engaged in the actual act of creating these watches. But as you grow, do you plan on, is there a point on your roadmap, let's say, where you want to grow to a point where you can kind of maybe step back, or is that not part of the plan? I mean, do you have a plan? I mean, you must do, of course, but do you still want to always be hands-on? Always?
A retirement plan, you mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a business as well, right?
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I guess something like that.
I mean, we'll work for as long as we can. So we're letting our build list go to 10 years, and that's it for now, because yeah, what's going to be happening in the world in 10 years' time is quite hard to it was hard to predict from one year to the next at the moment.
You said it, I will take over in 10 years.
Yeah. So after that, I mean, we do have kind of a dream in the long run to start making watches just for ourselves, so without a client at the end of them, and that would allow us to make the sort of projects that we've been excited about for years but never had a client for. So that would go down to sort of one piece at a time, and just making the way we want to and selling them, hopefully, when we've done. But
it's a dream, isn't it? Surely that must be the dream, right?
What, the Daniels?
Just one more, yeah. You want one a year, maybe, or something. I don't know.
Yeah, really have fun with it then.
Best of luck with that.
Okay, well, we like to keep these to the hour, so I think we'll finish there. Just wanted to say on behalf of all of us, thank you very much, Rebecca. It was a fascinating discussion, and thank you for coming to talk to us, and thank you for your work and your book.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, and thank you everyone for joining us.
Great. Well, thanks
Wonderful.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was great.
Thanks, Rebecca. Thank you,
I shall
Rebecca.
read your book.
See you soon. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.